Welcome to the Yield Coach Show, Season 1, Episode 9. All right, everybody, as always, every episode we bring you dynamic entrepreneurs, real estate investors, business leaders, and inspirational guests ready to open up, share their story, the good, the bad, the ugly, so you can learn lessons, gain advantages, and accelerate your own success. I am your host, Ian Brown, and I am thrilled to be joined by Will Segar. Will Segar is a former MAI appraiser for Chase Bank. He specialized in non-performing real estate loans for Lehman Brothers as a vice president. He's a second-generation real estate investor. He's a career distressed debt specialist. He was a Division I collegiate wrestler, and he still coaches Division I wrestlers to this day. Again, couldn't be more thrilled to have Will on the show. Will, thank you for joining us.
Ian, thank you very much for that intro. And just to give you a little background on where we are now. So Segar Consulting is my primary focus right now, even though I have been all those things, and I continue to be an investor with my family, especially in Virginia and North Carolina. My Segar Consulting is based in Long Island, New York. We have 30 guys around the country that we consult with. About half of them are on the website. We do every state except for Alaska. So that's kind of an overview of who we are and what we do.
And I want to take plenty of time to jump into Segar Consulting and kind of where you see trends in the United States right now, because you're uniquely positioned to be looking at trends across the whole U.S., where most of us are fairly siloed in our local or regional market. But I'm going to back up a little, and I want to jump into a little bit of family background. Tell us about where. I know you're from Virginia. I believe your father was a developer or became a developer investor along the way. Can you jump back a little bit into the origin of Will Segar? I know you were a college wrestler, but a little bit more of the early days, because you bring the ferocity of a college wrestler to everything you do in your workout. So if you could just back up and elaborate.
So when I was a kid in the 70s, my dad would pull me out of school and take me with him to all these trips. We grew up. We had a family farm in Virginia on the Chesapeake Bay. Been there a couple hundred years. So he was like one of the first guys to really get off the farm and get into finance. Went to UVA, worked for a life company, focused on the Midwest, Virginia, the Carolinas. He met a lot of really famous guys. Right, Mel Simon Sr. was one of his accounts. They became really close. They did the Orlando Hyatt House deal together in the 70s when it was foreclosure deal, and nobody thought Disney World was going to really be, what it's become. So, as a kid and seeing the 70s and him drilling stuff in my head and taking me on all these trips, I kind of always knew I wanted to do real estate. He was an MAI, so I got into that in college, took all the classes when I was at William & Mary, and, when I got out, I had all the coursework done. So Chase was like, great, you can start doing appraisals right away. Got the MAI, went to the small little group at Lehman Brothers with 5 or 6 guys where we would find these bad loans from these banks all over the country, and we'd buy them and put them into Cmbs pools. And the borrowers that were good guys, we'd work with them and do loan modifications. The other guys that weren't good guys, we'd usually foreclose and take the asset. But it was all about creating property value and fixing the issues with the asset and make sure that the debt or equity stack was correct.
All right. So for those that I'm gonna back up on a couple of things. So for those that don't know, the MAI designation is essentially the premier designation within the appraisal industry. So that means Will, and I didn't realize it, and your father were both MAIs. So commercial real estate appraisal designation. And I didn't realize you came from this unique hybrid of multi-generation 200-year Virginia farming turned into finance MAI. So you've kind of got that hybrid, like you can drive the F-150, but you can still run a 5-year DCF. You've got the whole thing. Now, would you take a moment, Will, to talk about, so CMBS loans are kind of your sweet spot. And can you just describe what a CMBS loan is and some of the characteristics of that loan for people that might not be aware?
Right. So one of the things that actually really helped Segar Consulting was the movie The Big Short coming out, because it talked about securitization, right? And even though it was residential RMBS securitization, it's the same concept. The difference is, you have $1 trillion worth of commercial mortgage securitization. In residential land, the reason we almost, got ruined in 07, 08 is, the residential market is 20 times that size, right? So, basically securitization is just a fancy word for a bunch of loans going into a pool, and you have a prospectus, a bond prospectus. It kind of looks like, if anyone's ever bought a condominium, it looks very similar to a condominium prospectus when you buy a condominium and you get 600 pages of stuff you don't want to read. So that governs what the bond rules are. We sell the bonds for, the AAAs and AAs, the investment grade stuff. Try to sell those for $1.10, $1.08, more than $1. So you make a loan for $1 and you securitize the bond for $1.10. You do that a billion times, you make a little bit of money. So that's a little bit of overview of securitization. On the website for SegarConsulting.com, we have a Columbia Business School chart that we use as a teaching tool that's really kind of interesting, and it goes through the whole process done by some Columbia professors on how it all works. It's a color-coded chart that looks like a giant chessboard.
On the CMBS side, for, again, some questions I'm going to have are just super entry level, but what would be some of the pros and cons for doing a CMBS loan? Like, what brings people to this product? Like, why is it desirable? And then what are some of the cons? Kind of like the pros and cons of the loan product.
Right. Great question, right? So now everybody is saying they're never going to do a CMBS loan again, and CMBS just had a record year for 14 years ago, the best year in 14 years on most refinances. Well, why is that happening? Well, okay, so you get the best, you get the best execution as far as you're going to get the most dollars. You're probably going to get the lowest rate, and every single loan is non-recourse. Okay, so why would you stay away from it? Well, if you have a problem, you're governed by hundreds and hundreds of pages of loan documents, super complicated. Also, the servicer's governed by something called the Pooling and Servicing Agreement for your bond pool, or REMIC. Your PSA, that's 1,000 pages. Your bond prospectus is 1,000 pages. And the bond prospectus, the PSA, and the loan documents all work together. So you're talking about 3,000 pages of documents. And you're talking about a special servicer that doesn't act like a bank, and he's representing himself. He'll suck information out of the borrower. He'll tell you things that aren't true. He'll try to be nice to you and get information out of you. And meanwhile, he'll file foreclosure on it, over the weekend or Friday night when you're not looking. Or receiver, right? So they're big on that too. They want to file a receiver and take over your property. So, we specialize in, like I said before, navigating the borrower, through this minefield and keeping them out of harm's way. Kind of like, even if you get a speeding ticket or you get arrested, you hire an attorney to go to court for you. So, that's part of the process. And where we are right now is the servicers have been very difficult. It's 2 years in. They don't want to admit anything. They don't want to admit their loans are, double property values in a lot of these troubled markets. But then there's data out there from Morgan Stanley, from Bloomberg, from Trepp, with spreadsheets showing thousands and thousands of discounts they're taking on these CMBS loans or modifications, and they'll just tell borrowers they're not doing any of that. So that's kind of an overview of CMBS land.
And so just to recap on the pros side, like I might be drawn, let's say you and I want to go buy an asset. Is there a general minimum loan size you see with CMBS?
Well, no. I mean, one of the benefits I've had, had Trepp, a big Trepp proponent, had it for almost 20 years. So, there's some small loans on there. I mean, there's $1 million loans on Trepp. I mean, they're rare, and Freddie Mac, which is also a securitized program with their multifamily, they have a small balance loan program. So, in the old days, they would say, well, no small loans, but now there's a lot of them.
Some of the audience might kind of smirk to say, okay, yeah, there's some small loans, they're $1 million. So just as like a side note, Will works on stuff that it can be hundreds of millions of dollars. So when he says small loans, these are still generally big loans. If you're listening to the show and you're thinking about buying some like local strip center that's $500,000, that's not going to be a CMBS loan. It's probably going to need to be $1 million or more. And like Will said, you've got a good rate, good LTV, and you've got the non-recourse component. Will, can you tell people a little bit about on the non-recourse side? Because I know this happens. Can you talk about some of the carve-outs or the bad boy clauses and how people get themselves in trouble?
Right. So it's really important if you do a CMBS deal to have an attorney that's really familiar with the loan documents and will negotiate the loan documents, and have a mortgage broker that works with your attorney that knows where to push back on. Because if you just accept the documents as they are, these bad boy provisions can get out of hand. I mean, it's a bad boy provision for anything, right? So, and also some of the things that I think are going against, we're finding out now, have gone against a lot of state constitutions, especially here in New York, probably in Florida. I mean, you could tell me more in Florida, but you're entitled to represent yourself with rights and remedies, and I had a deal the other day with L&R, and they're trying to say, your guy can't do this. He's teetering on by answering a foreclosure or receiver hearing and stating his rights. He's violating these bad boy clauses. So some of that stuff, you don't want to have it in your documents, but if it is in there, you need to be careful around it. So, it's just another reason people hate CMBS, right? I mean, it's tricky language. You got to have professionals help you do it if you're going to do a CMBS loan, and if you get in trouble, you got to have good counsel.
And so with these bad boy carve-outs, obviously, let's say you steal money or you lie on your P&L or you convert funds, a variety of things,
right.
Kind of bad operator clauses. This is where you're going to impute or trigger liability, right? So you go in, you get this loan, you're all excited because it's high LTV, low rate, non-recourse. But then if you're not a good operator or you break the rules, and there are a lot of them, you could find yourself with the carve-outs or recourse that you would have had in a normal loan. Plus you have all the bureaucracy weighing down on you from like you said, pooling and servicing and just a lot bigger prospectus than you deal with like a regional bank.
Right, that's correct.
Excellent. I think that's a good teaching point there too, because like Will said, these loans, they were trending down, and now, like Will said, they just had record origination. So Will's going to talk a lot about like pitfalls, and he's going to move into like some of his restructuring efforts in these loans when people have trouble and they call him to fix their trouble. But the reason why a lot of people are drawn to these loans, I had a client do one on a hotel 2 years ago, kind of like right before COVID. And a lot of borrowers treat these refis like sales because they get the high LTV. You don't have tax on the refi proceeds. It's non-recourse, which I use in air quotes because like we're going to talk about ways you could trigger recourse. And so they pull out enough money with the big CMBS refi to where it's almost as good as a sale when you figure in the cost of sale, the tax implications. But the problem is, because you treat it psychologically sometimes like a sale, you end up misbehaving or triggering liability or needing to call Segar later when you have issues with this loan or you can't service it. All right, I like all that. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about when somebody calls you. When should somebody call Segar Consulting when they're having trouble with their CMBS loan? Like, what's a good stage for somebody to pick up the phone and get a hold of Will Segar?
Dramatic drops or coming drops in revenue streams, lease expirations where the borrower knows ahead of time, big tenants are moving out and he's not going to be able to fill those spaces for a while. Like we're having here in the Northeast, giant increases in line item operating expenses. I mean, because of the riots in New York, you've got insurance going up 40 or 50% on these big buildings, right? And your coverage is not even close to what it would be, right? So a lot of lenders are saying, hey, we don't like the coverage. We want, you to self-insure. We want a letter of credit. We want some kind of bond. We want a cash reserve account, because the insurance is not what we like. And everybody's heard about inflation, right? So your utility costs are up big. Your payroll costs are up. Your supplies, your repairs, your maintenance, everything. And, your revenue stream is weak or flat or going to decline. Those are all indications, right? I mean, and those basically convert into a difference in value. So if I look at your loan balance and I can see all these other things going on, whether they've happened or what the servicer catchphrase is imminent, are they imminent? Is it an imminent problem? Is it going to be imminent default? And on the CMBS process chart, Columbia chart, there's 7 or 8 triggers of imminent default. If you have one or you have two or you might have all of them, right? But you're not you're not there yet. I mean, those are kind of the best times to talk, right? I mean, a lot of guys, especially if they're in a deed of trust state. I mean, Alabama's deed of trust, Virginia deed of trust. You know, it's a bunch of them. You know, Tennessee, I think, deed of trust. You know, it's really easy to foreclose. New York can take you 3 years in state court. You know, in Virginia, where I'm from, you know, 3 weeks and you can have a sale. And the only way you can stop it is Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and you better have some good reasons, like, you know, lender liability or something the lender did against the public good or violated state law, because if you throw it into bankruptcy, you better have an answer for the bankruptcy judge about why you had to do it. And the answer that he will accept sometimes, you know, we've done it, and it's risky, but, you know, we've been okay with it. But, you know, it's a court of equity. You got to prove that you were treated unfairly. You got to be able to prove it. And they'll say, okay, well, I'm not going to enforce the bad boys. Let's talk about a settlement. So all these things go into the nuances of how it goes.
And you touched on an important topic. So in the workout world, so Segar specializes in distressed debt, mortgages that are either really in trouble or facing imminent default. The deed of trust states versus the judicial foreclosure states. Like I'm recording this sitting in Florida, we're judicial. So that means to foreclose a commercial property. Now, I will say we haven't had a ton of foreclosures in Florida commercially as case studies recently, but when we did have a lot, it might be a 3-year effort. So it was, let's just say for the audience, it was a very long process if you hired good counsel before you ever lost your property, and you may be able to work something out during the process. Now, to Will's point, if you get into a deed of trust state, he just mentioned you might have weeks, not months, or not years. And Will just talked about having to maybe quickly file a Chapter 11, and some of these moves are all you can do. So I do appreciate you pointing that out, Will, because I think borrowers need to realize, especially as they do like their more kind of highly leveraged, like your bigger, maybe slightly riskier leverage deals, make sure you know what kind of state you're in, because if it metaphorically hits the fan and you're in a deed of trust state, you might lose that property very quickly, and it's going to be harder for Will and his team to have a resolution. Doesn't mean they can't get you a resolution, but those can be tricky. Will, can we talk about, you know, the phone rings, you pick it up, it's, you know, distressed borrower AJ, he's got a couple hotels, he's in a mortgage state, let's just say hypothetically, so you know you might have a little bit of time. Talk about step one and kind of like the new net present analysis and how you can use TREP and kind of give him information that he or she may never have realized.
Right. So with TREP, you know, you usually get a 15 to 25 page report on the history of since he got his loan. And one of the things we go through right away is his audited financials for the last 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is. And we do a site inspection. You know, we look at his rent roll, we look at his operating expenses, and we see where he is. That's the first part of it. And walking around with the borrower on the property, that's the most important thing, you know. So we can spend, you know, a few minutes on the phone, and I can say, look, you know, instead of us having an hour phone call, you know, where are you? When can I meet you? You know, here's what I got. Here's what, you know, I have that you might not know that I, you know, have in my possession. And a lot of guys have not heard of TREP. So that's how it starts, right? And then it starts with, you know, after that, we get into more of an appraisal conversation about, you know, the location, the market, the competition, who's around him, who he competes with, you know, where we're going from here, what does the break even on the property look like, and, you know, how do we analyze our current situation.
And what's unique is, I mean, Will's talking about going to the asset right away. I mean, his approach is very boots on the ground. I told you he's a wrinkles in the neck, elbows in, forward moving college wrestler ready to get out there and tackle these problems. And you know, the TREP report is, and Will can correct me if I'm wrong, but this document that Will has is they face SEC violations, I think. Will can tell me. If they lie in these reports, these are reports that would be audited financials or would become audited.
They trigger the bad boy, and also if they don't report, all Cmbs loans have to report every 90 days with audited CPA numbers with a balance sheet and income and expenses. That's part of your loan documents. So, you know, and it's critical to the bond purchasers, right? They need to know these loans in these pools, how they're performing every quarter.
So Will's got this report. We talked about how it has real teeth. I mean, if you lie in this report, you're probably essentially triggering recourse, maybe civil penalties. And he gets there, he walks the asset. Now, and I'll let Will talk about this, he's going to do a granular analysis, look at like deferred maintenance, deferred CapEx, all the things they're not telling their lender to distill down to a real net present value. And honestly, probably equally important, what kind of debt can this new NOI actually service? Because at the end of the day, you got to be able to pay your loan, and that's Will's magic sauce, is kind of figuring out how to keep an asset alive and what it can do based on real net present value.
Right. And a lot of the valuation you're pointing out is the net present value of the loan, because that's the servicer or lender's collateral. And then there's a conversation, okay, here's the net present value of the loan. That could go, up or down depending on what we do. Here's the market value of the property. A lot of times the stuff I look for is market value of the property is, say, $5 million and the loan balance is $10 million. So what's the loan worth? The loan's worth something less than property value, because if you own the loan, you've got expenses, you've got legal costs, you've got to convert that loan into a deed. If you go through foreclosure, or some borrowers might walk away if he converted to a bad boy back activity, and you've got him on some kind of recourse that he is liable for. So he might do a deed in lieu to get out of that. So there's all these different conversations that may occur.
All right. So you've taken the call, you've done the net present analysis. What at least you think at Segar Consulting, the net present value of the loan. Obviously, the net present value of the property. You've decided what it can support, if it needs new capital. Like we've looked at buildings, Will, from roofs to elevators to everything in between. You have these large capital expenditures, failing chillers, whatever it is, and it could be millions of dollars that there's just no money to fund it, and the property's struggling and not making debt service. So Will takes all that into account. Now, can you tell us the next steps? So say it goes into special servicing. These are the loans that are now troubled. What's going to change, if anything, for the situation or the borrower once you move into special servicing?
So one of the things we do with the borrowers and his bookkeeper, his accountant, whoever's writing the checks, is we do a really good job, helping him stay out of trouble and making sure we're running the property the best we can. We're completely transparent with the lender. We're doing monthly trailing 12 and future 12 every month. Everything ties into, the bank accounts, the QuickBooks, whatever software he's using, and then ultimately to the federal state tax returns, so there's no funny business going on. So that way we're proving we're running it better than the lender can run it. We're showing them every month what's going on. We're providing them thousands of pages of information in various drop boxes on the property, the market, the deferred maintenance. Sometimes they're required to get an appraisal. Sometimes we get an appraisal. What went on after COVID is they rushed out and got all these appraisals with these 10-year cash flows, with these super aggressive, optimistic revenue projections, which have never happened, and some of them will never happen. So we find an appraiser that worked for the servicer or the lender that they trust, that they can say that they can't say that the guy's not qualified because they've used him many times, and we submit it to them. And we try to get them to talk about it, which, a lot of times we have to use counsel to do that. We have to use some type of judicial intervention. And they really have been, this cycle, the services really do not want to talk about appraised value. They just don't want to do it. And the reason they don't want to do it is because, they just want to talk about their loan balance and everything's fine, and they want, you to pay them what you owe them. And that's impossible for these non-recourse loans, because they can only recover property sale value less expenses, which their expenses can be considerable. I mean, in a place like New York, where it takes a long time to foreclose and the attorneys are super expensive, $1,000 an hour is not, unusual. You're talking about millions of dollars in legal fees on big projects. So, yeah, it's all part of the process.
Now, Will, you're in special servicing. Obviously, let's just assume they've got their appraisal, they being the bank. You've either done a net present value or an appraisal or both, so you know your numbers. When do you start making negotiation proposals? Kind of when does that fall into the process?
Right away. Usually we come up with something right away, and they say, no, we don't like that. Then we do it again, don't like that. So we try to have at least 2 or 3 in there, and they just say no a lot of times, especially, some of the more famous ones are notorious for this, some of the specials. Mm-hmm. This time they're just starting to get, the last 6 months or so, we're almost 2 years into COVID. They're just starting to make deals. Morgan Stanley did a great spreadsheet I sent you with what's happened in the universe, what discounts they've taken and what modifications they've done. And, they want you to prove to them that you're their best option, which, in a lot of these distressed markets right now, I can prove I'm the best option by a lot. 30%, 40% over the term of the loan is kind of where we're coming out, that as far as proceeds, more dollars than we can pay them.
Yeah, and I think that's an important takeaway. So, and just to rephrase what Will said, Will is demonstrating to the servicer, the special servicer, that sticking with his borrower, the current borrower, and doing a workout is going to get them better total proceeds on this loan than if they just sold it out, foreclosed and sold the property out in the open market. So I just wanted to hammer that home. All right, now, Will, if somebody calls you, what are you having to quote for time? Let's just assume they're in imminent default or like in the beginning of default, and it's obvious they're going to need a workout. The ship is not coming back up. What is the typical timeline?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it can take 6 months. It can take 2 years. It depends on the property, the state they're in, the local county judges, what they're doing, what's going on with the market, what's going on with the tenants and the, leases, operating expenses. I mean, it's a really tough question. I mean, some of the ones that are the easiest, the quickest are guys that have been, up here in New York. I mean, some of these guys have been back and forth for 2 years now and getting nothing done. And we're getting in the middle of them recently, like in the last, since Christmas. And we're getting in there and we're saying, okay, here's the money we're able to provide. Here's the plan we're able to provide. And we're ready to go with our plan in, a 45-day closing or a 60-day closing. We'll put up, X percentage hard money. Let's get some kind of letter of intent or contract going. So once that everything's been exhausted and there's a big fight underway, coming into some of these deals in New York right now where things are getting worse, not better, those are going to be the quickest closings. But where there's a question, as to where we're going to look like, and, maybe the property's doing a little better and the market's a little better, and, it's not like New York City, which is ground zero for this right now because your expenses are so far above, what they were, and your revenues are flat or dropping. In a lot of the other markets, the servicer's always going to take the view that, if I can, stretch this guy out and things get better, he's going to have to pay me more what he owes me.
Now, Will, I think this is a good time to kind of segue into, okay, we've gone through, it's been 6 months to 2 years. That you've battled it out with the servicer. You've made 2, 3, 4 proposals. You're finally getting down to a resolution time. Let's talk about the types of resolutions. What are some of the scenarios that either you've secured or a borrower could expect to secure at the end of this process?
A lot of the ones that got done in the last 2 years are, interest only, right? And pushing out the maturity date, because those are easy for the servicer, right? Some of the more painful ones from the lender's point of view are the discounted payoffs. I mean, there's been a lot of DPOs, right? I mean, they're not talking about them. They don't want to talk about them. But in these, distressed markets, there's been, 80, 60, 70% discounts where guys have either paid off the loan at a discount or they've purchased the loan at a discount, a discounted note sale. There's been some A note, B notes where not very many. I think maybe 50, 75, 100 of them. I think there's a lot of them I'm hearing that are being talked about right now where they size the loan to property value and they make payments on the A note, and then the B note's a hope note to be paid at maturity. So, and there's a variety of other stuff, interest rate cut, extension, options, typical. A lot of the loan negotiations very similar to what you might do with your mortgage broker when you're negotiating a loan with another lender. So you go through the whole loan documents with your attorney and your borrower and your lender, and then talk about what we can do and what we can't do.
All right, I like it. So you could go the interest only, extend the maturity date, a DPO, discounted payoff, which for those people that haven't heard that term, it's akin to like a short sale residentially. They're going to have to sell the note for less than is owed. A note, B note split. Will's talking about taking the whole loan and splitting it into at least 2 pieces. The B note maybe not receiving debt service or being a hope note for later. So, Will, let's jump into some of you've been doing this since the last cycle. Can you touch on high level a couple of or a handful of some case studies, or dive into an example of one or two that you've done?
One of the ones that got done here right before COVID hit, I think we did it in 2018, was about a $16 or $17 million shopping center here in Long Island. And it was kind of unusual, right? Because the economy's been so good. And, we got the guy a discounted payoff at $10 million. He bought his own note. It was a discounted note purchase, right? And it was I think it was like a mixed use, office and retail, urban kind of community shopping and office center, right? And it was a valuation play, right? I mean, expenses had gone way up, rents had changed, there was some vacancy, and we played the appraisal game, right? And it took, I think it took 18 months, and we got it done. So some of the ones from last time, one of the interesting ones was we had a Long Island big power center where we did an A note, B note, where the guy paid, $92 million for it. I think we got the A note down to $62 million or so. And the B note, I think, was 10. We got a 7-year extension. And we got a variety of interest rate cuts, from interest only to some amortization later. We did the Compass Bank building in Albuquerque, one of the biggest, tallest office buildings in Albuquerque. That thing was almost a $30 million loan. I think we paid it off at 15. Same thing, it was a market rent thing. Market rent dropped dramatically, expenses went up, vacancy was an issue. So it all depends on, who you are, where you are, and what you are, right? I mean, I'm looking for things where I can say, okay, you're in a tough spot right now, you're a good borrower, but I think I have an answer. And everything doesn't qualify, and every, location doesn't qualify, every property type. So you got to look at each one.
And by the way, those are some phenomenal outcomes. I mean, the gentleman buying his own shopping center note for 10 on a 16, or the big shopping center, I believe in Islandia, going from a 90 some odd million dollar balance down to a 60 A note and a 10B. I mean, these are huge resolutions. And that should keep you on the Christmas list for sure. Now, those are good case studies. If we compare and contrast a little bit, so you've had some just kick-ass outcomes and you've done really well. Are you seeing any change in posture, or like if you had to kind of crystal ball what servicers might be doing on this next round, and you're in the trenches now, what are you seeing differently from when those last resolutions were secured?
The banks this time have been much easier to talk to, right? Because they, especially here in New York, they're the ones that are filing most of the state court foreclosure cases right now. Even though we have a moratorium, I think this just extended it. The servicers have been kind of holding back. So that's different than last time, right? I mean, the banks being, at least wanting to talk. I mean, in different areas of the country, it's different. I mean, so far, if you look at the servicers across the country, they've just been saying, pay me. So that's all changed in the last 6 months, and will continue to change. And it's changing because these markets are just not coming back the way everybody said they were. We're going to have an issue here in a lot of these markets where you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe some of them with some secondary locations and secondary distressed markets may never get to some of the numbers they did in certain zip codes and property types.
Now, Will, I'm going to pivot a little bit on you, and let's go into some of the personal investments. I mean, you're a second generation real estate investor. Can we go back to some of your deals that you might have done early on, if you want to dive into a case study or two about some of your first investments? I believe they had to do with pulling deals out of distressed debt situations, so it ties in thematically to what you do now.
Right. I mean, when I left Lehman back in the late '90s or mid to late '90s, whenever it was, talking to some of the banks that I knew about deals they had in foreclosure. One of the local banks I bought an apartment complex from to start with, and kept with that model, right? And just using my relationships with lenders where they could, they were fairly far down the road towards foreclosure, and my ability and my skills to track these cases and see when they can get what's called summary judgment, which means they're pretty close to having a sale, or they have a sale scheduled, and you take an assignment of their winning foreclosure bid, right? So they don't have to be in the chain of title. All these little tricks I learned from my experience and my former bosses training me at in my career helped me in my network finding stuff. And fast forward to today, I mean, it's a lot easier for your audience to get involved in this, right? I mean, the technology is unbelievable, right? You can track state courts, you can county courts, you have Pacer.gov, they've been around forever. TREP we already talked about. Geodata Plus is an amazing software that covers every state on every filing. It's all about finding them, and the guys at the bank aren't going to tell you, hey, I got this problem, you got to find it, right? And the way me and my family have done it is working the bank stuff, working the markets, trying to find things that are out there. Guys are struggling, and today it's not that it's easy, but you can do it better. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Finding these guys and looking around at projects that have stalled. Contractors, right? Contractors that would call me, hey, I'm not getting paid on this job. You might want to talk to this owner. All kinds of stuff like that.
Man, those are really good nuggets, Will. Thank you. So for those of us, because of the way the economy's been for, let's say, the past 10 years, a lot of people, they might have been buying distressed stuff like 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. But let's say in the past, certainly the past 3 years, it's been tricky as an investor to find anything like truly distressed. Now, some people might be listening and say, no, I bought 10 foreclosures last year. But for most of us, I live in Florida, there's just not a lot of distressed out there right now. So what Will's talking about is it might take some digging. I love that bit about the contractor not getting paid, calling you saying you might want to call this owner. That's a great tip. But working all these new resources. I mean, from Pacers, the bankruptcy stuff. TREP has all the Cmbs and securitized loans.
Right, and also just a note on Pacer. Also, district court and appellate court are now on Pacer, right? As a technology thing, which is and also mechanics liens. Like there's not a lot of foreclosure cases in Jacksonville or Florida, but there's tons of mechanics liens, right? So contractors are always filing liens for they get paid on the roof or the parking lot or some big item, right? So that's a way in. You can find out who the guy is, find out why he's complaining, find out the background of what he's owed, and get in the middle of it, And you might, some of the big ones, the guys, some of the ones up here, the guys owed $3 or $4 million for a renovation on a, 50-unit apartment complex. You might pay off that contractor and end up being partners with the owner. There's all kinds of deals up here that get done like that.
Wow. I hope everybody's taking this in because those are great ideas. Because essentially what you're doing is you're finding pain points through these creative avenues. I mean, paying off a contractor for $2 million or $3 million to come in and be a partner in the asset, that's a great idea.
Nosey's an attorney here. I mean, also in the liens on Pacer, right? You get a Pacer account and you look for liens in bankruptcy cases, right? You've got secured and unsecured liens. Look for Main Street LLC. That's going to be a single asset real estate case. And finding out who these people are and hey, I just want my money. Now you're a party to the case. Now you're an insider, right? Also looking at partnership disputes, right? Partners suing each other, right? Learning your way around, your local court system is so valuable now, and everything's online. I mean, every document, read the background, read the summons, the complaint, the loan documents, the exhibits, the answers. I mean, there's an unbelievable amount of data out there if you're willing to read it.
I agree, and I think some people think like, oh, I just have to have like the guy at the bank that does all the special assets or distressed assets call me and tell me. That's never going to happen. To Will's point, you're going to have to be on the offensive to find these deals that are in trouble and then work to get a contact at the bank or come in one of these channels that he just described. You guys can probably tell that Will's approach is a little atypical, a little uncommon, but it's worked incredibly well for him. And it goes hand in hand with the workouts, the Segar Consulting Cmbs loan workouts. You can restructure, reform these loans, or come in as an investor, or bring in investors and rescue the deal. It's just such a creative way to get into this arena and get into investments that no one else can get into, or that very few people are thinking about getting into. All right, fast forwarding a little bit, Will. Today you're working on the CMBS. No one has a crystal ball. Can we talk a little bit about, and you and I have discussed this in the past, we've got parts of the country that are doing really, really well, and we've got other parts that are not. And I think that most of us, we know our immediate area, and then we just hear national news. Can you talk about, from your seat where you're looking at TREP data nationally, a little bit of like where people are winning and where people are losing, and kind of where some of the trends you're seeing?
Right. It all starts with demographics, right? Like I mentioned before, a lot of the West Coast people are coming to Arizona, Colorado, and Texas, right? A lot of the East Coast people are coming to Florida, Tennessee, the Carolinas, right? So wherever you have these massive demographic changes, you have, demand drivers, right? I mean, so you've got, a lot of markets where, your rents are going up, and it's a direct result of people and companies moving there. And, the ones that are dropping are, again, the Northeast. The expenses up here are ridiculous. The taxes are out of control. The cost of doing business is very prohibitive. The bureaucracy, the legislation, the government climate up here, it's not pro-business at all. And a lot of the other thing that's going on is trends and tendencies. The COVID was a tipping point. Obviously, all the commercial guys like us knew that there was going to be some kind of reset because values were going through the roof. We didn't know it was going to be COVID, but we knew these values couldn't go forever, and that's exactly what happened, right? You got to a peak, and now everything's going down. And the other thing that's happening is with these technology and lifestyle changes, big cities and big government, they're not happy with, having, like I've got 9 computer screens and doing what you want and come into your office one day a month. And that's what's happening in New York, LA, all these big cities where, it's so, it beats you up commuting 2 hours a day. It's expensive. You're happier at home. You come in when you want. I mean, that's the next shoe to drop up here in New York. There's 1.5 million Midtown Manhattan office workers. Only like 300 grand of them are showing up for their jobs. So, the trains are empty. The Long Island Railroad's empty. The New Jersey Transit's empty. Metro North does Connecticut's empty. The subways are, at half capacity. I think it was, 6 million a day. I think they're only doing 3 million a day. And it's not safe, right? So, there's a big problem with crime. And it's kind of weird going into New York City these days. It's like a time capsule going back to the 80s. And
just to kind of tie it into what Segar Consulting and the workouts, if you work on an asset, let's say it's a Manhattan asset, and then you work on another asset, it's in Arizona or Tennessee or Texas or Florida, are the servicers recognizing or acknowledging what you're talking about, that these assets might have trouble for the foreseeable future?
They act completely different, Ian. I mean, they are taking the view that the Texas asset is coming roaring back. It's almost halfway there now. Texas deed of trust state. They're happy to own it. They act completely different, super aggressive. It's a much harder deal. It's gotten to the point where in some of these hot markets, I'm telling the guy, I'm like, look, I don't think I can do much for you. I mean, they've dug their heels in, and the market is hot and things are going to get better. You just need a little more time, and you're going to have to pay them. And I don't think I can get you a discount. So I do have those phone calls, and they do happen in these hot markets in Florida and Texas especially.
I'm kind of curious. Would you think it's advisable to go into some, if you say New York is like a time capsule, and in your opinion, between the professional workers being down to a third, the subways being half full, and I can't obviously verify any of this, but is this a good time to try and swoop in there and grab anything? Is there anything being priced at a discount, or is that not advisable? Do you have any opinion on that?
So it's really, the transaction stuff is really, all starting to come to a head, right? Like a lot of the stuff that's gotten filed, you've had a massive amount of filings, thousands of filings in New York City in the last year, right? And what's filing first, right? A lot of the lenders you've never heard of, there's some banks in there, there's some special servicers, but there's a lot of private lenders in there, a lot of hard money lenders, a lot of properties in places like Brooklyn and Harlem that got bought right before the people were really pushing, cap rates on and the rent roll multiples on. That's what's showing up first. And, the sense is that, the wave is going to come, because now, you've had some really big transactions like, Deutsche Bank I think had about $300 million loan. It was in the Real Deal, which is an industry magazine up here. $250 million or $300 million. I think they sold the loan for $65-75 million a year ago. And 20 Times Square, which is in the Texas deal, it had a $900 million loan on it. The Texas just credit bid it to foreclosure auction a couple weeks ago. It's got a hotel. It's on the corner of. It's a two-sided corner. I think it's on 42nd and Broadway. It's got the NFL experience in there. So it's got one of the biggest billboards in Times Square. It's got 100,000 square foot of retail with 20 or 30 of these tenants. Got a 450-room hotel, $900 million mortgage. That thing's probably worth $100. So, these are all shockwaves coming through Manhattan, right? And there's a lot of the jury's still out. Like how many of these guys are going to file? What it's going to look like? From where I'm sitting, I think we're starting, to see this wave of stuff. I think they're going to have to, because a lot of these guys haven't made a payment in a year, maybe 2 years. They're on some type of forbearance that's expiring, now, in the next 90 days that they got, 12, 18 months ago. So all these, and New York's not what it was, right? I mean, you've got rents that are totally different, especially retail and office leases. You got a ton of stuff that's expiring. The sublease market now in Manhattan is crazy. I mean, you can rent stuff for $20, $30 a foot in $80 to $90 a foot office buildings.
Wow.
So that's going to have a major impact on renewals, and everybody's talking about downsizing. The Morgan Stanley CFO, I think he figured out that Morgan Stanley can save $1 billion a year on real estate costs, occupancy with Morgan Stanley. And they were one of the guys, and Jamie Dimon was saying it too. Everybody's got to come back. Well, now what's happening with the executives that make a lot of money, and senior executives, talk guys that make $1 million, $2, $3 million. They're saying, listen, I'm going to come back when I want. So all these big investment banks have kind of pulled off, coming back in the office, and now the vice presidents and the kind of middle management guys are saying, well, if my boss is not coming in, I don't want to come in. So it's gonna get weird. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. That was a very granular response, and I appreciate it. I mean, those are some detailed reasons why just New York as a microcosm, it might not be the time to get in there and grab something. It might be, if there's thousands of filings hitting right now, you might want to see what happens when all these properties actually maybe go up into foreclosure sale or other workouts, versus down here in Florida, we kind of saw, I kind of consider us like a catcher's mitt. We were taking all these people that were maybe like COVID refugees or just wanted to get down into some warm climate, or if they're already working from home, they're like, well, I'll work from home and want to Ian Brown's Rentals. I have a duplex by the ocean that I furnish, and I kind of run it like a Vrbo long-term Airbnb. Most of my inquiries in the past 2 years have been, people that are either displaced or now they work from home, or they're moving to Florida. They're going to build a home because they took the money from New York that goes a long ways, at least in North Florida. They're going to build a beautiful home, but it's going to take them over a year. So they rent from me. So we're both seeing trends where you're seeing the office submarket that was, an $80 a foot office that somebody might sublease for $30. I'm seeing people come down here and pay whatever is required to move down to Florida. I guess, what's interesting is we talk about the haves and the have-nots of the country. So I think if people are taking their real estate and economic news only on a national level, you're really missing out. I hope you heard what Will had to say, and it's just not the same everywhere. So be very granular in your analysis. All right, Will, a little bit on the personal level. Could you mind touching on some of like your greatest influences, or you kind of what's inspired you to somewhat be the guy you are today?
Some of my bosses, at Chase and, early in my career, the New York stuff was really, really interesting, exciting. When I graduated from William & Mary and coming from Virginia and kind of the farm background, the New York City thing was meeting massive amounts of people, that were doing huge deals, that were doing small deals, that were doing medium deals, just, networking, around the Northeast, and the pace up here, and that was kind of addictive, right? And the excitement, and everybody's hustling and bustle, and there's a million things to do, professionally and socially. It's just been a pretty crazy ride. And then, I got out of, Wall Street, and I did my own thing, and then did some stuff in the Carolinas with, where I had a brewery and I had some nightclubs and, did that for a while. Just, I've kind of done a lot of things in a lot of different industries. So, always looking for the next thing, looking for the next opportunity. I think the next 5 or 10 years is going to be really, really different. It's going to be nothing we've had in the history of the United States. And it's already started, right? And it's all about technology. It's all about being creative. And I think for the Ian Browns and the Will Segars, who are basically, small entrepreneurs, and, we can go anywhere, we can work from any place. I think that's the future, right? Because kids from college are going to say, oh, well, you guys used to sit in, these little cubicles in these big office buildings. That sucks. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do what Ian and Will do. My wrestler at UVA, he just graduated, right? He's like, I don't want to go get an office in a building and sit in a cube. And then, it's like being handcuffed to the desk. None of these kids want to do that. And they're all looking for a way to use technology to have a lifestyle and freedom. And again, I don't see that being beneficial for, big cities, big bureaucracies, big government, big places where there's a lot of status quo. I mean, I think it's great for the Floridas and the Tennessees and the Carolinas and the Texases and the Arizonas.
And you touched, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because one of the things I typically ask towards the end is like a advice or coaching point. But when I said, who are your greatest influences, you went quickly to like your New York managers, your New York bosses. And would you say for somebody kind of coming up or looking to glean a takeaway, networking was huge, like getting yourself out there, even if you're naturally introverted, not that you are, but just forcing yourself to network and get out there and be with the people that are really doing it?
Right. One of the things that really helped me, as I was getting the MAI, were all these MAI networking events and being in that program. And then, the real estate broker, every state, if you're not an MAI, get involved with the real estate brokerage programs. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have an amazing, education. Most states have amazing education. If you're not a broker, find a broker you can network with, figure out how to get your license, and do it young, right? I mean, that's one of the things you can do now, right? And, you say, well, I don't want to work for this guy. Well, you can get your sales license, take something like the CCIM or some of the MAI classes, and really you can self-motivate, and you can get out there and you can Zoom and you can network and you can LinkedIn and you can Facebook and you can Instagram. And just because we're not moving around, like I had to move around when I was, at Chase or Lehman Brothers, we had to actually go to happy hour, which was no problem. We had to go to, these events, and, it was all this networking that you had to go to. Now you can probably be more productive and more efficient, sitting in your living room, with a bunch of computer screens and trying to figure out what you like, what you're good at, what your skills are for, and then go get the information that you need to get better at what you do. It's a lot like wrestling, right? If you don't think you can beat somebody, you study film, you study tape, you go to the gym, you eat different, you train different. You're like, to beat this guy, I got to do these 10 things. It's the same thing with commercial real estate. Figure out where you want to go, and then figure out the skills you need to get there, and use the technology. I tell the young guys today that I'm coaching, you guys have so many more options than I had, or even you had, Ian. It was so much more structured. Now you can do whatever you want.
That was awesome, Will. You have so much varied knowledge, and a lot of what you know is from actual, I call it experiential knowledge. You've just done so much that it might not come from a book or a website or a podcast or whatever. But in that vein, for the audience, are there some resources, whether it is books or websites or channels or any, where would you recommend people look if they're trying to gain a lot of information? What are some resources you like?
Oh, Bloomberg. For years, I was a Wall Street Journal guy, and I switched to Bloomberg. After I got involved with Wall Street and my Wall Street buddies, Bloomberg is incredible. Join Bloomberg for. I think the student. I made all my college wrestlers do it, right? The student package is nothing, right? And also, there's a class where you can get certified on the Bloomberg terminal. There's 3,500 reporters in 150 countries. And they cover every topic you can think of. Not just real estate, but if you want to learn about, commercial real estate, why not learn about, all the parts of the world that influence commercial real estate? And that's what Bloomberg is. I get 20 emails a day from Bloomberg on everything you can imagine. 5 things to start my day. What's going on with the power struggle in Ukraine? What's going on with the bond market? I mean, if you're going to go one thing and it's pretty cheap, right? Sign up for Bloomberg, right? I mean, and then from there, if you want some real estate specific stuff, Geodata Plus, I think that's really good. Those are, and it's cheap. I mean, Trep's super expensive. It's a little bit much for most people. It's a really specific thing. I use it all the time because of what I do. But if I didn't do what I do, I probably wouldn't have it. But 2 things that are pretty cheap and pretty easy and national or international are Geodata Plus and Bloomberg. And Bloomberg will get you thinking about 1,000 things. Wall Street Journal has a tendency to be storylines, right? Bloomberg is hard data, it's numbers, it's all the stuff I like, all the stuff you like. They tell you the why and the how, whereas the Wall Street Journal will always send you a nice picture and write an article, and there won't be that many facts in the article. Bloomberg's all numbers. And they have some of the other stuff too. And also, the Roku app on Bloomberg. I mean, there's thousands of videos you can watch. You can self-educate yourself on anything you want.
Well, thank you, Will. That was great. And the Bloomberg, and was it Geodata Plus was the other one?
Yeah, geodataplus.com
okay.
And Bloomberg.com.
All right, Segar, we're pretty much towards the tail end. Is there anything else you'd like the audience to hear?
No, I think we did a lot in a short period of time. Thanks for the opportunity, Ian. It was great. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, it's segarconsulting.com, and I'd be happy to hear from people. And thanks for your time.
And there, you took my last line. I was like, where can people find you? So just to recap, that's segarconsulting.com. We will put it in the show notes. Will, I really appreciate your time. You're a busy guy. You're a wealth of knowledge. And you've actually been a bit of a mentor in my professional life. I love your perspective, and I hope the audience can glean some of what I've gleaned over the years. All right, everybody, if you like what you're hearing, please be sure to rate the show and subscribe. So whether you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, this video will actually be on YouTube as well. If you want to see, Will Segar's got a fresh shave. It's a good picture. You can see that. Also, follow us on Instagram. We're on Facebook. Again, we do have the YouTube channel. Let's grow the audience so we can keep having great guests like Will. We'll bring you updates whenever possible, and you can shoot in questions you might have in advance. We'll try to tackle them on the podcast. All right. Well, for that, that's about all we have for this episode. It's been a blast. And this is Coach Brown signing off and telling everybody to lace up and leave it all on the field. Thank you.